this and let's do it. Welcome to Run With Purpose. This is episode number 54. And for those of you that are new to the show, my name is Flores, and I'm so very glad that you found this podcast. Would love if you would subscribe. And as always, you can reach out to me on all the socials at flores.run. A typical thing I hear from doing this show and just running in general is a lot of people downplaying their like goals and dreams and what they're able to accomplish and stuff. And today, this week on the show, we have a guest that kind of works hard to push that belief from people's thoughts. She's super motivating on Instagram and on our blog, just kind of giving this like, yes, you can mentality. So today we have Kerry. She's a working mother runner of two with dreams and aspirations of qualifying for Boston, which I'm right there with you. One day, maybe, we'll see. But yeah, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be a guest, and, you know, to hear all those things you say about me is just kind of crazy. I feel like I just post my life and kind of what's going on. So if I'm able to motivate anyone, that makes me extremely happy.
Yeah, it's so interesting that like kind of the reaching out of kind of how social media works in general is like, I just reach out to people and be like, hey, you want to talk about that? And a lot of times it's that same response of why would anyone kind of want to hear my piece of it? But to this entire episode's point is you can do a lot of things, even if you're not realizing you're doing them. You're kind of pushing people to be their better self and stuff like that. But obviously, like I said, this is what we're going to be talking about today, and I'm not going to waste my breath talking. We want to hear from you today. So Kerry, just give a little bit of background about yourself and kind of your story and this whole you can mentality.
Okay. I guess a little bit about me as a person. Like you mentioned, I am a mom of two. I have an 8-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter who definitely keep me on my toes. We live in Southern California, and I'm also a middle school counselor. I actually have a lot of experience with high school counseling and preparing students for college and going through that whole application process. But I recently started working at a middle school, which has been a huge change. I haven't worked full time since I've had kids. So I've definitely been adjusting to working full time, taking care of the kids, you know, being their taxi service for their activities, and also still, you know, wanting to work on myself and my personal goals. I know that's just a huge part of my life is running, fitness, mental health, you know, all of those things kind of go together. So I'm definitely trying to find that balance at the moment. As far as my running goes, you know, I kind of have a funny story. I ran a half marathon in 2011. It was one of the Disneyland races. And I kind of just signed up on a whim. I just wanted to just do it, to show myself I could do it. I said, running was never my thing. I danced growing up. And I thought, I'm going to try to run a half marathon and see how it goes. I did it. I hated it. And I'm
that's usually the exact same thing. If there's like, oh, I did it. It was miserable.
It was miserable. I had horrible IT band issues, which I didn't know what that was at the time. But I remember, you know, limping into work the next day and saying, yeah, I'm never going to do that again. But I'm proud that I did it. And I think I finished in 217, which at the time I'm like, I was pretty proud of that.
Yeah.
So that was 2011. I had my son in 2012. My daughter in 2015. There was no running in between there. I was still in the fitness world. I actually owned a fitness studio for a few years, kind of within that time span. But running was not really a part of my life after that. After having my daughter, I just randomly got this idea in my head. And I might have been looking on Instagram and seeing, you know, people talking about running races. And I thought, I want to do it again. And I want to see if I can do it faster after having kids. Because I think a lot of times women, we have kids and we think that we can't do what we used to be able to do. And I wanted to kind of just get that out of my head. I wanted to kind of shatter that idea and show myself and maybe show others that we can do that times 10. We're kind of super women after going through that. Our bodies are amazing, and, you know, being pregnant and giving birth and all of that, we become even stronger. Mm-hmm. So I ran another Disney race, and it happened to fall on Mother's Day. And I did it in, I think, 2:06. And I was, that really pushed me. That was the one race that I did finish. And I said, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to be addicted. I mean, as you can see now, I'm totally addicted to running races. And that's really what hooked me, was that race. I thought, okay, I did it. I was faster, and I felt stronger, and I wanted to just keep going and do it more. So I set my next goal of running a sub-2 half. I did that about 6 or 7 months later, and I hired a running coach, which I think kind of changed everything for me, and ran my first full marathon, the end of the following year. Again, I ran that race. Sorry?
Which race was that?
That was, Ventura Marathon.
Okay.
Yeah, which was a great race. It was super well put on, slightly downhill, a little lonely at parts. It's not a super huge race, but it was a great race. I finished in 4:26, I think. And again, that was another race that I ran and said, I am never running a full marathon again. And I remember thinking at the end of that race, how do people run this so much faster than I just did? I couldn't fathom, how do people run this in 4 hours or 3:30, or those people that are running, under 3-hour marathons. It was just in my head, like that's insane. I don't know how they do that. And I did vow that I would never run a marathon again. I think a few weeks, I think you need a few weeks to wrap your head around what went down. And then I was already looking for, when can I run my next full marathon? But I do think it was kind of that time that really hooked me. And working with a running coach, I think also, I remember talking to my current running coach, Natalie. She's amazing. And I remember when I started working with her, I actually started working with her after that full marathon. And she said, and I told her, I have dreams of qualifying for Boston, but I don't think I can do it like that. It's almost an hour off of my first marathon time. That seems pretty impossible. And she kind of laughed and said, not at all. Like I thought me saying that to somebody, they were going to laugh and say, yeah, you probably can't. That's insane. But her response to me was like, absolutely, we can do that. It might be a few years, or you might surprise yourself, and it could be sooner than later. But 100% that's doable. And I do remember that conversation being a huge change in the way I thought about my running goals and what I wanted to do. And I just kind of shifted that mindset and thought, I'm going to go for it. Guess what? If it doesn't happen later in life, at least I know that I tried and put in that effort for it. And we've made some pretty amazing strides in the past few years. I've been working with her almost about 2 years. And my goal after that first full marathon, which was a 4:26, was to jump down to a sub-4. And I trained my butt off, and I focused on some shorter distances for a while. And I signed up for a smaller race in Palm Springs. It was the USA Women's Marathon. It was the first time they did that race. So it had some issues.
I know those. Your first time race, you're like, oh, I know what this means.
Yeah, it had some issues, and I won't blame all of what happened that day on the race, but there was definitely a big lack in aid stations, water support. There was not many people out on the course. It was like a double loop of the same course. I should have investigated it myself. I think I kind of just chose the wrong race at the time. I kind of nailed the first half, and then just got hit with major side aches, and I couldn't get rid of them. And the mental struggle I had that race, I think I got a 2-minute PR. I finished in 4:24, which people were like, yeah, you got a PR. But in my mind, I'm like, no, that was not close to my goal. I completely bonked it. And I struggled a little bit after that. And I remember the love of Instagram. I love the running community on Instagram. I got a message from someone that said, find another race in another 6 to 8 weeks and do it again. And I was like, I don't know. That's a lot of, I've just been training so hard for, the last 4 months. It took me about a week to kind of mull it over. And I went to my coach, and she's like, I fully support that. If you want to do that, I support it. And I did, and I didn't post about it. I didn't really tell many people. I kind of kept it private. I know some people are like, you shouldn't run, marathons back to back. And I definitely don't think that's something I will do often. But in this case, it worked in my favor. And I signed up for Carlsbad Marathon. It was like the end of January. So it was about 8 weeks later. And it was just, it just worked. Like from mile one, I knew that it was going to be my day. I just felt it. And I finished in 3:56.
Nice. Way to go.
Which I was stoked about. So it was almost a half hour off my marathon time. And while I believed it before, I think when I finished that race was when I said, I'm going to BQ.
Yeah.
I'm going to BQ. So, that just kind of solidified it in my mind. And that's where I really got into that yes, you can mindset.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because my goal was kind of my journey, if you will, was kind of similar thing is I wanted to run a sub 4. My first marathon, I was like, it's going to be sub 4. It's going to be amazing. Everything's going to be great. I even trained. I was a pacer for a local running group, and I was pacing for a 3:45, which I was like, I got this in a bag. First marathon, I ran a 5:05. And I was like, well, that was not ideal.
Little off.
Yeah. And I ran the Flying Pig in Cincinnati, which is supposed to be an amazing one for first timers because of crowd support. But like, I think miles 5 to 8.5 are straight uphill. Like there's no break. It's just uphill. And then it's rolling. It's a miserable race for your first time, except for crowd support. The race itself is just like, but it's put on well. But, and then like my second one, I think I got like 4:59. I was like, what is going on here? Like, this is ridiculous. But then I got it down to 4:30, and then same thing. Sub 4, I ran a 3:59:30. And I was just like, I could not have cut this any closer. And the fun part with that race is my buddy Mike was running with me, and he's a sub 3er. So when he was pacing me for the sub 4, he finished the race. He looked fresh as daisies. I had to go to the medical tent. I was like, this is absolutely miserable. But yeah, having that, like, okay, now that I've done it, you kind of get over that hump, because it took me so long to get to that sub 4 that I was just like, is this ever going to happen? Like, maybe I'm just not fit to do that. Because, there's certain runners, the runners that can do sub 3s, they're just built that way. But then you start getting in your head, you're like, okay, well, maybe I can now that I've gotten this taken care of. One thing you said that was like interesting to me was the kind of the response of your running coach saying like, hey, if that's your goal to BQ, like we can definitely do that. But you almost having that understanding that you're going to have to try, and more than likely you're going to fail along the way with that. How do you handle that when those thoughts come through your head? Because inevitably they're going to, because it's not every single race you're going to PR. Your one, technically it was a PR of 2 minutes, but to you that was a failure. How do you kind of bounce back from that?
I'll say it did take me, I cried. I cried after that race. I remember sitting in the bathroom crying, and it's so silly because I think to others who aren't runners, my husband's very supportive of my running, and friends, but if they're not in the running world, you don't quite get that disappointment. Like I had so many amazing comments and messages from people that were like, you just ran a marathon. Like, don't be so hard on yourself. You finished a full marathon. You finished faster than your last one. Technically, you should be proud of yourself. And that's true. And I tried to remind myself of that numerous times, and those comments are appreciated. But I think when you are a runner and you've been in that position, you just get it. You understand where that person's coming from. And I do have, I call my runner girl gang, my group of girlfriends. We don't get to run a lot together right now. But we all kind of talked about it, and it was kind of nice to just commiserate and complain, because to others, they're like, who cares? You just ran a marathon. Right. But with other runners, they're like, yeah, I get it. That happened to me. I went through that too. And I think being on, it sounds so silly, but like social media with runners is so motivating to me also. That's where I get so much of my motivation. I'll go through and look at all these amazing runners that I follow that are now running a sub 3, that ran a 5-hour marathon, their first marathon. And to me, that I need to see that. I love seeing that people have made that huge jump and seeing, okay, another 20 minutes off my time is completely doable. And I've followed so many of those stories of women and men who have run a few marathons and just bombed it. And then the next one that they ran, they freaking knocked it out of the park and beat their goal time by 10 minutes. So it's crazy because I think if you are not a runner or you're new to running, you do see these times or these goals that people have and you're like, wow, that's possible. And that was totally me. Like, wow, people ran a 5 hour and then they ran a 3:30. Mm-hmm. You can't really comprehend it. But when you start to learn about running and actually training for these races. And I've learned a lot about training for shorter distances in order to help my marathon time, which I kind of thought, I'm just going to run half marathons and marathons because I enjoy long distance. But this year, when there weren't many races with COVID, I focused on personal time trials, and I did a 5K and 10K time trial, probably about 6 weeks, maybe 6 to 8 weeks training for each one. And while I hated it because that short speed work and those rates, that's just terrible. We did a mile time trial too. That was the worst one. I would rather run a marathon than a mile time trial. But focusing on those shorter distances and that speed was huge. I mean, that was such a booster for me, like a motivation booster. And it also helped with my times. So that was what I really focused on this year. And I think that was helpful. And I did run, I needed a race. I wanted to run a race so badly. And I did run the Mount Charleston, the Rebel limited edition.
Yeah, okay.
It was not cheap.
Those races are not cheap.
Yeah, they're not. However, I hadn't run a race. I ran Carlsbad in January. I did Surf City half pretty much right before everything closed down. That was kind of just for fun. I had just run Carlsbad. So it was like, I ran it with some friends and just kind of enjoyed it. But I hadn't run a race and I'd done all these, virtual ones and time trials. And I was just kind of, okay, I haven't spent money on racing, so I'm going to throw it all on this race. Yeah. And I actually did have a girlfriend who was trying to BQ. So we went out there together. And she did BQ. She knocked it out of the park, which was amazing. And I finished in 3:47. So I took another 9 minutes off my marathon time, which was huge. I did have a little bit of a quicker goal, but I was not bummed at the end of that one. I was still very happy with my progress. So I'm getting closer. I'm inching away at it, and just trying to keep my focus and my mindset kind of on that end game goal that I have there. So,
yeah. And I think it's interesting you said you weren't as bummed because of that goal, but I think it's because your end goal is now changed. It's Boston, and that race wasn't going to be the Boston race. Like if that was going to be, I'm going to get into Boston on this race, and then didn't, then even if you ran the same exact time, it's just that mindset. And I think that's probably the biggest thing with all of this is how our mindset goes into these things of how we are thinking about ourselves or about our goals, about what we can or cannot accomplish. That kind of does it. Because if we reframe our mind, things aren't as bad as they seem. But to the same point is they can be worse because we're like, no, I needed to get this. And it's like, yeah, but you just had a 5-minute PR. You're like, yeah, but that's not the point. Like I had to walk, or I had to do whatever the case might be. I've been doing.
Yeah, I had a rough end of that race. If you've ever done any of the Rebel races that are downhill, it was my first one, and people had told me and warned me, but you don't know until you're in it. It's a heavy, strong downhill. And then the last 5 or so miles, it flattens out, which after a decline of like 4,000 feet. I mean, it was pretty steep. It feels like you're going uphill. And there was a hill around mile 24, which looked, if I went back now, it was probably, I'm surrounded by hills where I live and it's not a big deal. And if I went back now, it's probably a tiny little, little jaunt up a few feet. At the time looked like Mount Everest. Mile 23 through 26.2 were just, my quads were dead, just completely done. My calves were seizing up. So I was stopping to stretch my calves. I ended up having like 4 minutes of of solid, like not moving time, which that was the time that I was stopping and stretching my calves.
Right.
And I walked a ton. So I think, and even though that, you know, you look back and like, I wish that didn't happen. I looked back and I thought, even with that happening,
you still PR'd.
I still PR'd by 9 minutes. Like, that's huge. So I know that showed me that I'm capable of even more. That showed me I can sub 340. Like, I can totally do that. That just wasn't my day. I just was not prepared for that downhill, the brutality on my muscles and my calves. And if I can train more on downhill, or even just have more of a flatter course where I'm not getting so beat up like that, that showed me that I could do it. So yeah, like I thought maybe, I think up until mile 21, I was on par for like a 338, which was huge. That wasn't even my goal. My goal was maybe close to 340, 343. So even seeing that up to mile 21, because it would like send me a message, oh, you're on pace for this, or people would text me and I'd hear it. I'm like, wow, I'm on pace for 338. I know I'm going to slow down at the end of a marathon. So I knew that probably wouldn't happen. But seeing that and hearing that and seeing what I probably could do if I held on to the pace that I had, that was motivating. So yeah, I didn't get, you know, a lower 340s, but I still got into the 340s. You know, I was at 356 before, so I'm a sub 350 marathoner. And I know that I can hold that pace up to mile 21. So I just got to work on those last few miles. So it was definitely more of a positive feedback, you know, positive like mindset when I finished that one. So
yeah. And I think that not my day mentality is really the thing that a lot of runners themselves need, because it's so many things can happen at a race. Like you said earlier, you just pick the wrong race that one time, and this time it's the downhills could have done it. It could be perfect training, perfect everything, and then it decides to rain on race day. And what are you going to do? Like there's literally nothing you can do about it. It's like, well, the race is today. I'm going to run this race. Like we have a race here locally. It's a 50K. And it's so funny because every year there was something. Like it's in the middle of May, and for 3 years in a row, we had thunderstorms and then beautiful sunshine, no clouds, and then like dime nickel size hail. And you're just like, oh, this is great. I'm just like getting pelted with hail for no reason. And then one year it rained really, really bad. There was flooding throughout. So we had to like do a detour because there's a creek crossing. You couldn't cross it. It was too deep. But then there was a sinkhole on the trail. And I remember seeing this like puddle, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure there's a hill here. Like I remember there being a hill, and this is flat now. So I went around it, and there's a picture of one of my buddies. Literally, he's like, I'm just going to trek through it, and like to his neck in water, just like underneath. And this is at like, I don't know, this is mile like 15. And you're just like, well, you're halfway done with the race now that you're completely soaked, you know. But this idea of not, the specific thing isn't your day. It's kind of understanding that and going, you know what, I'm going to make the best of what I have. Because if you make it miserable, like the marathon is long enough that you don't want to be miserable that whole time.
Yeah. The marathon's always going to be miserable at the end, I feel like. Oh yeah. The last few miles are always going to be a struggle. But if you're in that mindset from the very beginning, it's going to be pretty tough. So, and I was a little worried because being from Southern California, I think I mentioned, it's 88 degrees here today, middle of January. I am a total California girl by heart. I've grown up here since I was 6 years old. So I'm used to this weather. And Mount Charleston we started up the top of a mountain, and there was snow. I remember pulling up. I'm like, I haven't seen snow in I don't know how many years. I was prepared, clothing wise, but I was a little nervous. I don't run in 30 degree, 20, 30 degree weather. It heated up pretty quickly as you moved down, but that was one thing I kind of worried about, and it ended up being fine. But, you got to do that research before your races, so you know what you're getting yourself into. Yeah.
So kind of like flip it back. So we think about like from the beginning, like when we kind of made that move from the half to the full. I remember after my first half, which is crazy enough, my first half was in 2010. So it's been a decade of me running, which just seems bonkers to me. But the idea of finishing that half and going, I don't know how people do this twice and also like it. How do you, like, what would be some things we can say to like listeners that might be listening to this going, yeah, I'm in the same boat. Like I want to maybe take that step, but I'm like fearful of what happens if I fail at that step or what happens there.
Yeah. So I vividly remember, it was my third half. That was when I went for my sub 2 and I got 158. And I remember, so Surf City half and marathon, when you're doing the half, you're coming back and then the full marathoners turn back around. You're kind of doing a double back and forth. And I remember watching people turn around to go back and do the second half of their marathon and thinking, wow, those people are completely insane. Like I'm so glad I don't have to do that right now. And I didn't understand how they were going to do that. I was dying and ready to be done with 13.1. And then when I started talking to people about it, and they're like, well, yeah, you're not trained for it. When you're training for a half marathon, the most you run is 10, 11 miles. If you're just kind of in the beginning of running, I think the most I ran was 10 miles for a half. So I remember someone saying to me, well, yeah, you've never run more than 10. You aren't trained for that. So of course you don't think you can, but you can. And I watched a bunch of marathoners. I watched people of, 30 years older than me that were, crossing finish lines for the full, and just watching their faces and the feeling that they got when they finished that full marathon line. I remember thinking, I want that. I want to see if I can do that, and maybe not so much worry about time, just to do it. I mean, what did they say? 1% of people in the world run a full marathon. Like, I want to be a part of that small community that says I can do it. So after talking to a few people, and I thought, I never thought I could run a half. I never thought I could run a half under 2 hours, and I just did. So why can't I run a full? Why can't I be a part of that, small group of people that do it? So I did start working with a coach. I wanted to make sure that I did it the right way. I, again, was coming off IT band injury. When I got my sub 2 half, I finished with major IT band pain. So there was something, going on there that I didn't know about. So I did get the help of a coach and I started training for a full marathon. And it's not fun when you're training for your first one, because you don't really know what you're getting yourself into. I learned to love it, but those early, especially in California, training over summer, you have to get up pretty early to get a 20 miler in, or you're going to be running in 90-degree weather. I'm not a morning person, so that took some adjusting, and just going through. You do have to stick with a training plan. I mean, that is my one thing I tell people. If you want to run a half or a full and you haven't before, get a coach or get a training plan that you're going to stick with and you're going to follow through. I would not recommend running a marathon without really properly training. You most likely will get injured. You could end up, walking or not finishing it, because it's freaking far.
Yeah.
It's far, and you don't know. I trained properly. I did everything I could for my first full marathon. And I remember texting my sister-in-law, who had run a full before, at mile 22, maybe. I definitely hit the wall on my first one. And I texted at 22 and said, I don't know if I'm going to do it. I don't know if I can finish. And I don't remember what she texted me back, but it was basically like, suck it up and go, you got it.
You've made it this far. Course, you're going now.
Yeah. And then you cross that first finish line, and that feeling that you get, there's no feeling that you can get like crossing a full marathon finish line, regardless of how that marathon went. When you cross that line, it's kind of something you can't explain. And I have some really good pictures. I think I've posted them on my Instagram before. My husband and 2 kids were about, I don't know, a few hundred yards from the finish line. And my son came out and grabbed my hand, and we crossed the finish line together.
Awesome.
I'm glad he didn't get in trouble because he didn't have a bib. But I have some pretty awesome finish line pics of, crossing that marathon line for the first time, and him holding my hand. And I don't know if they really get it. Usually it's like, did you win?
Right.
Like,
then why do you do it if you didn't win?
Yeah. Why'd you get a medal if you didn't win? I get those questions a lot, but, I'll never forget that feeling. And I think, even crossing that finish line of the marathon that didn't really go my way, it was still a pretty amazing feeling. And it's, I guess, you're happy you're done, but there's nothing quite like it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Between I think almost every single race, I get this, I get like choked up before every single race, like you're sitting in the corral and you're just like, and we didn't really talk a lot about it beforehand, but I'm working towards 50 states. So I'm trying to power through these races. And a lot of times it's, it's like, hey, last weekend I just did 2 races and now I'm going to do another race this weekend kind of thing. So it's a lot like physically to handle, but for whatever reason, every time I'm in that start line where I can just kind of get that like calm of just like, hey, we're going to do this today. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what the time's going to be. I don't know any of that stuff, but all I know is I'm going to be out here and I'm going to have a great time. And then crossing the finish line, I'll never forget the first time I crossed, mostly because it was an hour and 40 minutes slower than it should have been. And then my wife was waiting in the rain and stuff, but like the pictures, like it's like crossing and going like, I just did this, like no matter, and no one's going to take that away from me. And I remember I was so caught up with times early on, my first few marathons I did. I was so concerned that I wasn't getting fast enough. And now I've gotten to the point where I'm just like, what I'm doing is the ability that I've been given to do this is something that I can't take real credit for, but it's like, it just feels so amazing that I'm able to do these things and experience these things. And a lot of times in races now, like I'll stop and walk with people like while they're walking and just be like, hey, need anything? Let's chat, let's talk. And then most of the time is you see those between like mile 20 and 24, they're first timers because they went out way too fast at the start, or they didn't train properly, or they weren't prepared for X, Y, and Z. They were only drinking like Red Bull all day or something like that. You're like, don't do that. It's a bad idea. And you start talking to them and it's like their first time. I'm like, oh, let's keep this moving. Let's do whatever. It's like, I did a race in Newport, Rhode Island. And there was a lady that I was feeling real rough because I had run a marathon the day before in Connecticut. So it was just like, I was just like, you know what? I just want to be done. And I didn't realize how hilly Rhode Island was. Like, I'm like, oh, this is ridiculous. Like I thought you were flat. East Coast. You're supposed to be flat.
Yeah. You always look at course with the elevation and the course. I will never not do that.
Yeah, I didn't do that for either one of those races, and that bit me in the ass afterwards. But I'm running, and I see this lady, and we were like playing kind of tag team, and then we were probably around like mile 19 or so. And I just start talking with her, and we go through the things like, I want to do Boston. I was like, I'm thinking about doing possibly charity because I want Boston to be my 50 state for mass. But just with how many races I'm trying to get in each year, like I really can't focus on a BQ right now. Like it's just with my goal for this, BQ has to be like secondary. Yeah. And when we were talking, she was like, she knew someone that was like the president of something for Team BMC for the Boston Medical Center. And she's like, oh, I'll just talk to them and we'll get you a spot on the team for next year, which would have been this year, or 2020, which then got canceled, which I was like, this is great. Of course, the year that I finally get into a charity. But I was just like, it's you meet people and you have these relationships with people just because you're having conversations in that. And I think that's what I get out of races now. Like obviously every once in a while I'll have a time goal where it's like, no, like, sorry person, I'll ask if you're doing okay and I will hand you a water or a gel, but I'm like, I need to keep moving because I've got a goal. But a lot of times it's really just like the experience of it all, because I know what it's like to be there. And I knew how crappy it felt when people just walked on by and didn't even acknowledge that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. The last few miles of a marathon, I love, it's a struggle, but I love the support that other runners give each other. The end of Charleston, I think almost everyone was in that boat of like, everyone was struggling with the muscle pain and the muscle seizing. And so there was a few of us, I would say there's probably 4 or 5 that were all kind of in the same area. And we, one would pass and then, would stop to stretch. So then we'd kind of get caught up and we kind of kept going back and forth. And every once in a while we would just say, come on, I would just hear like, let's go, let's do this. We got this. We're almost there. And we were all dying. We were all struggling, but like just having that person that I didn't even know next to me and seeing him struggle as well, but we were pushing through it together. I mean, it's just amazing. That's what the running community is. And one reason I love it so much. And I remember we all, once we all kind of crossed the finish at different times, not one person just kind of walked off. Everyone was like, man, you helped me. You saved me. Like seeing you ahead of me, I just followed you and stuck with you, or, it was just such a cool feeling of like, yeah, that sucked, but we all just finished and it's awesome. And it was just kind of an overwhelming moment of like, just all those emotions, like you said, just crossing that finish line and all those feelings kind of come over you like, yeah, I just did that. And we all motivated and pushed each other. It was just, it's just awesome. And that's kind of that's what the running community is. And even what Instagram can obviously be it can be a negative place, but I have found the running community to be a huge positive piece in my life, because there's days that I don't want to run. I'm tired. I'm working. I have kids, and the last thing I want to do is either get up at 5 a.m. to run or do it once I get home from a long day. But like, I'll go on Instagram and see people in the same position and they went out and did it. And they have that advice. And I'm like, all right, turn off Instagram. I'm going out there and getting my run done. So, it's just a positive community. And I enjoy being a part of that. And if I could motivate one or two people to get out that day and do something, or even if it's not running, if they find something else that they enjoy, but they stick with it, then great. Like, that makes me so happy. So
yeah, it's interesting because you bring up like Instagram can have that like negative effect in so many other areas of things, whether it's like people's looks or things that people have, like possessions and that sort of thing. But it is surprising, like with the running stuff, because I find it as well, obviously with the podcast and trying to like meet new people. It's how, even though people are so much faster than me or doing so much more than I feel like I could do, they're still just reaching out and being like, hey, great work today, or liking a photo or sending me a DM. And you're just like, I didn't even know you knew I existed, much less that like you actually wanted to reach out to me. And it's interesting how everyone's like, no, like you said earlier, we've all been through the same kind of thing. And I think that's what brings runners together is very few people have just started running and have been amazing at it and have gone, most of the time those are the elites because they were already built for it kind of thing. But a lot of people, you started off, you struggled, you figured some stuff out, you failed a little bit, and you got better. And I think because we all kind of share that, regardless of the level we're at, like the failure still feels the same, whether it's like, oh, I failed to run a sub 3 or I failed to run a sub 5, like both of those are the same failure, and we kind of communicate on the same wavelength of going, no, like you went through something. This was an issue. You had this goal, you didn't reach it. And I know exactly what it feels like, but hey, you can do it because this is what I did. This is how I was able to overcome it. And here's like kind of my thing. And I've made some great friendships on Instagram because of that.
Totally. I have runner friends that I was supposed to run Chicago last year. Obviously that didn't happen. And I actually am waiting and deferring to 2022. If I'm going to do Chicago, I want to make sure I get the full experience with everyone out there. And
Chicago is amazing. I loved Chicago.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's going to be possible this year or if it will happen. So I'm going to wait on it. But I have connected with so many people from all over the world. And, sometimes I've met up with them at races, at certain races and got to meet them in person. But I'm so invested in so many random people that I don't even know if I know they have a race. Like I'm honestly excited to get on Instagram and see how they did. Like it's at that point where people I don't know in real life, but I followed their journey of training and I want to see how it happened, what happened. And if it didn't go their way, I want to reach out to them and support them and let them know that like, hey, it's just one day, it's one race. It doesn't define you. You're going to do it again. But it's funny. I see that with a lot of people, and there's probably some runners who don't have any idea who I am, of course, but I still am like dying to see what happened with their race and just super excited. I love seeing other people reach their goals or achieve their dreams and seeing other people. Like when I ran Charleston and the girlfriend that I came with, I knew she was going to be cute. She's just, she's worked her butt off and she's just so motivated. She's amazing. And I knew she was going to, she had her own doubts. But like I knew when she finished and I knew when she freaking knocked it out of the park. Like I remember running, like I wanted to cry. Like I was so happy that she met her goal. And I knew I was still going to get a pretty good PR. I'm like, yes, we get to celebrate this now. Like, I'm so excited. So yeah, of course, my goals and achievements are important to me, but I love seeing other people reach their goals. I love seeing other people that ran their first marathon slower than I did. And now they're running, an hour faster than I, like, I love seeing that improvement. And I think that helps me and I think it helps others. So I like when people post like their comparisons of like their first marathon to their current one, and you see that they took 2 hours off their time. I think it's important for us to show people that it can happen. You have those doubts. Like I said, I ran my first full in 4:26 and was like, there's no way I can run that faster. And I've taken like 40 minutes off of my time. And when you, in the beginning, like you don't understand how it's possible. You don't understand how that training can get you there, but it can, and you can see it. You see it on social media. You can see people talking about it. And I think you just have to believe it. You have to know that you can do it, and then it's going to happen.
I can't think of a better way to end the episode than that. So I'm going to shut up, and that's just how we're going to end the episode. But
perfect.
Thanks again for being on the show. I really, really appreciate you coming on.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I mean, I'm honored to be here and to be talking. Like people want to listen to me talk. I don't know. It's astonishing to me, but like I said, if I could motivate anyone the way that other people have motivated me to keep going, then that makes me a very happy person. So,
yeah. So how can people connect with you on Instagram?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. It's me, Kerry V. It's Kerry. There's so many ways to spell Kerry. It's me, Kerry V on Instagram, or I do have a running blog called Running Isn't Scary, and it's spelled scary like my name. So it's SKERRY. So awesome. Yeah, I started that. That's just kind of fun on the side, but I again like to encourage new runners, and I think it can be intimidating to enter the running world on social media. But if anything, I want to show them that it's a welcoming, happy place, and we want to see others get into running. We want to see others be successful in running. And that's kind of why I started it. I kind of share my story. I share, running items that I love and products. And I share my experiences with running. So hop on there and read it if you want. If you ever have any ideas or questions about running, I'm happy to talk about it on there too.
Yeah, so definitely follow her on Instagram, because we talked about the motivation thing. She is super motivated, and you'll see her post and she's like, hey, it's 88 degrees outside and I just ran 8 miles. So what do you do still sit in your house? You know what I mean? But yeah, so definitely follow her. We'll have all of her information in the show notes. You'll be able to check those out. But for everyone else, you can reach out to me on social media everywhere at flores.run. Again, subscribe, leave a review for the podcast. The written reviews help with the algorithm and all of the sciencey stuff, so people can find these shows. And if you want share interviews like this, amazing interviews, people need to hear this stuff, so share it. You can also visit my website at www.flores.run. I promise I will get my Utah blog finished. It's only 3 months past the race date. That's fine. It's no big deal that race recaps are 3 months late, but I ran Utah. You guys know that's fine. What else? Hangry launch. We talked about that as well. WeAreHangry.com. You can buy merchandise, find all the stuff we're doing. It's going to be super helpful. We partnered with Qualified Apparel. So not only are you supporting Hangry, you're also supporting those living with hunger throughout the country. But thanks so much for joining me today. Remember to keep running with purpose, one step at a time. We'll see you next week.